what makes living worthwhile? Like, why am I alive? Not in an existential way, because I spend all of my time thinking in an existential way. This is more like a what makes being on Earth fun kind of way. I think that there's a weird thing where we've had this obsession with, I'm gonna have to use my phone as a mirror. We have this weird thing going on as of late around the inner child and how it's like, oh, if you want to figure out like what you love, just do what you did as a kid. But a lot of us as kids were dealing with a lot, and the escapism and the like how much of what we did as a kid is just as escapist or a product of our environment as what we do as adults. Like, who's to say that what we did as kids wasn't just as reactive to our environment? And obviously there's less pressure as a kid because you're not like paying bills or whatever, but okay. Like, I don't know, I just find it really interesting. I don't know if that does anything. There's just value in general in appreciating your child self, but there also is kind of an obsession with it. It seems like in certain spaces, especially spaces that are calling themselves spiritual, there is this obsession with the quote-unquote inner child. And while I think we're all extremely traumatized and really could do with healing our trauma from that time in our lives, I'm not sure that like the answer to everything is just do what you did when you were a kid, because you know what we were drawn to as kids seems like just as much of a combination of influence and external impact and escapism and survival as adulthood, you know. But I think that there's merit to it in the sense that there's like a smaller range of what you know is possible. And so if you latch onto something and want to go in that direction, you know, there's something there. But also, and I get, and also while I'm saying that, I get why that's also like a spiritual notion. I have no idea what I'm doing, so that's occurring. What was I saying? Oh, I get why that's a spiritual notion, because obviously it's like, okay, well, there's a reason why your spirit and your soul have latched on to something with you being so young and with you know, not having such a broad range of what's possible and what's available. So I get it in that way, for sure. I think that for me personally, what I liked as a kid was, I don't know, I feel really confused sometimes about what I really liked as a kid, because there are certain things I knew 100% that I loved. One of the things I knew for sure that I loved as a kid was fashion, because I was always, like, I remember in the 4th grade checking books out from the library about fashion and drawing, you know, textbook-like books and doing fashion drawings and stuff like that. Okay, maybe let's not do that. Maybe let's just keep it. Okay, that's just a bit of gray around the eyes. Maybe I should add some brown. We'll see what happens with some brown. There's like this rise in cool-toned makeup as of late, which is kind of concerning because like cool-toned is for cool-toned skin tones, and that's not what I have. So that's been interesting. Anyways, I've been thinking a lot about like what makes life worth living, and what are the and specifically what makes life worth living in relationship to objects. Is there any relationship? Is having, like, everything is sort of symbolic, right? Because everything is about how it makes you feel and what it represents. Everything. You know, a movie brings you to a certain place in your psyche. A book moves you to a certain place in your psyche. Texture, anything. These things sort of create certain kinds of sensations in your body. And so they're all symbolic, they're all representational. I don't know what I'm doing at this point. They're all symbols, they're all representational. And so it kind of begs the question at the end of the day, like, okay, what are we doing here? Because if everything is a symbol, then what is the real thing? And there's no separation. It's just like, I just did a talk recently with Alex Wolf that should be on this YouTube channel soon, if it's not already, about the internet and how, you know, there's no offline anymore. And that sense of like wanting to reach, do I want mascara? No. That sense of wanting to reach towards the past or wanting to deny what's occurring. And what's always occurring is life. And life is also symbolic and representational because it's just a bunch of sensation. You know, if you close your eyes, we rely so much of our experience is the visual. But if you close your eyes, you don't have the visual, so that symbolism is gone. And now the representations are auditory and tactile. And it's just sensation. It's just input of sensation. And so really thinking about like, do I want to do this? Sure. Really thinking about why we gravitate towards certain kinds of sensations, certain kinds of representations of reality in life is really fascinating to me, because there's not really like a real rhyme or reason. You know, you get to make yours up, and then it just becomes all very existential, as it always does with me. So, but I've been thinking a lot recently about how I think I'm just gonna leave it like this, honestly. It has been very interesting to me recently with the Nosferatu coming out, to think about how my relationship to the concept of being goth. Okay, I like this look. I don't know how it reads on camera, and I honestly don't know how it reads in real life, because I've never seen my physical face without a mirror. Crazy. But like, I also don't have a physical mirror, but I like this look. It's just like the bare fucking minimum. I have no idea where I left off. All of life is sensation. And I don't like the accumulation of objects. And at the same time, I have this doll. Okay. She's the best. I love her a lot. I will be keeping her forever and ever, as long as I can. I just like her. She has a lot of like symbolism for me personally, my ancestry. I love her outfit. I love her cheeks, like her rosy cheeks. I like her hair. I like that she's just in this little box. I hate that the box does not have a top on it. I don't know why that is. I bought it like that. It's like, I love that. The relationship to physical objects as symbols is fine. And there's certain things where, but like the thing is that I have to now keep track of where this doll is and like worry about this doll, and that's weird. And that's the case for like any book I own, or anything that I own. If I have some sort of sentimental attachment to it, I now like, you know, worry about it, or I have an emotional attachment to it because of the symbolism that I've sort of instilled in it by choice, right? Because if I just had a bunch of rocks around me, like a bunch of like stones, I could also instill symbolism in those stones, and I could like draw a picture on them to create more symbolism, or to keep track of which stone had which symbol. This sense of making things in the shape of things, or making things in the aesthetic of certain things to kind of give them a certain feeling, is something that we love to do. We love to play with the symbolism of life. And so anyways, I've been exploring that, and exploring what I want to invest my time, energy, attention in that aligns with my values. And one of the things that I was into as a kid, but not ever fully, was like gothic, dark, like darker clothes. But I wasn't into really heavy music. I was still into the popular music at that time. So yeah, I feel like as a kid I was still quite like eclectic. And I feel that way as an adult. But there's things as an adult that I feel like has symbolism. I'm using an eyeliner as a pointer now. As an adult, I'm really gravitating towards, especially as a spiritual person who is so aware of the meta aspects of things, right? About like, okay, this is all just symbols and textures and things like that. So what the fuck is the point? And feeling that way, but also feeling like I'm here on Earth, and I can appreciate and understand objects for what they are. And there are certain objects that I really appreciate having around me that are utilitarian and beautiful. And I'm looking at a lot of them right now because this is my whole space up here. And I was watching another YouTube video today and feeling really like they were talking about a bunch of designers and artists that I also really appreciate and love. And that's something that really lights me up is art. I love, 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 love art. I went to art school. I dropped out of art school, but I did go. I just love art. I love color. I love design. I love texture. I love like quality. I love craftsmanship. I love old things, like antique-y types of things, not just any kinds of antiques, but certain kinds of antique things. I like dark and macabre things. There's a lot of things where it's like playing with those preferences that I have. And a lot of it for me is thinking about, if I'm gonna own stuff anyway, I might as well make that stuff into something that is representative of me. But there's that line, right? Because we don't technically need any objects that aren't utilitarian as human beings. We might not even need objects in general. Need is subjective because need is like, okay, well, could we hunt without objects? And obviously we evolved with objects or into wanting to acquire objects and have them in our lives. And there's a reason for that. But it's still a very strange idea for me personally, like having objects around. And part of me is constantly wishing like to just get them away from me. Like part of me is always rejecting objects and wanting objects to not be around me. I don't want them. And it probably has something to do with responsibility. It has something to do with clutter. It has something to do with probably a lot of other things. I feel like I'm just rambling, so if you're still watching, thanks. But this sense of like what makes life worth living in relationship to objects and how I interact with them and how I choose which objects to have in my space, all of these things have been on my mind recently. And I think like there are certain things that when I remember that everything around me is meant to be a symbol of something, I can then choose my symbols more wisely. Like, you know, okay, well, do I also want it to be something that's utilitarian or that is art? And if it's not either of those things, then why do I have it? And what do both of those things mean to me? The reason I wanted to make this video and I wanted to talk about these things is because I feel like I have a deep love and devotion, or like a deep love and a hunger for certain aesthetics, a deep love and a hunger for like the way that certain things occur. Because why else are we here if not to enjoy how matter has manifested around us? And the way that we have placed value on certain objects over other ones, or how we've created and determined utility versus superfluous, or versus non-utilitarian, or just not important as objects. And obviously like Marcel Duchamp was a huge like breakthrough, and I'm so grateful for his art. I think about his art all the time with his ready-mades, that sense of taking objects that are seen as useful and making them into art, and making them into sort of bad art and ugly art and weird art. And so yeah, the object has always been an object of artists and philosophers and spiritual thinkers and seekers and what have you. These things have been always been on the brain, always been on the mind, always been a question. And also, one of the things that I'm doing right now is diving more deeply into a private ancestral magical practice, and like in a formal way. And one of the major tenets of that practice is about physical objects, and is about how, you know, the utilization of physical objects, and how that really rubs up against some of my tendencies towards really rejecting physical items and having a hard time with the physical world of objects, and them being used for magical purposes, and like, okay, and how I'm belittling the potential use of a physical object as a magical object because I belittle the use of objects and the utility and the importance and the beauty of objects. And I'm also saying that with like, there's stuff all over the place, but it's less about if I have objects or not. It's about how I feel about having the objects, and the fact that they're not something that I find to be important, of import. And I don't know if I want to change that or not. I think I'm really exploring that in 2025, is how values manifest in the physical world. I'm very clear about how my values manifest in most other ways, but in like materiality, and yeah, that's always like a constant exploration. And one that is a bit like intense, like more intensive than I expected. Yeah, especially in the world of like fashion. I recently saw this video of this man who collects fashion not to wear, but just to have. So he has a bunch of pieces from runway shows from a bunch of different eras, and he collects, like, obviously most of it is vintage. I'm always saving stuff like that because it helps me loosen up my relationship to the object. And yeah, just saying like, wow, I really love that he loves that, and I love that idea of having that and that being okay. And yeah, objects really just, they really get me. Books are an object I don't have as much of a problem with, but I I don't know, I just have a big problem with objects, and that's something that I'm looking to change in 2025. I think the fact that why a life is worth living has like includes consumerism now. I don't think it's something to necessarily rebel against constantly. I think it's definitely something to consider the impacts of that. But I don't think we need to constantly be rebelling against something that at this point just is. I think it's fine to look at it critically, and we should look at everything critically. But, you know, consuming is occurring, and it's constantly occurring. What we've created as a society in order for us to survive, meaning have a comfortable life, so it has nothing to do with survival, but to have a comfortable life, it requires a lot of stuff. And stuff to make your life go faster, stuff to make your life easier, stuff to make your life comfortable, stuff that you can sleep well, stuff that you, right, so you can eat quickly, so all these kinds of things. So we have built this kind of house of cards of objects, and I just find it very uncomfortable. A lot of my values, when I say like my values are art, like I can't describe to you why this doll is so important, but she's important. You know what I mean? But she's creepy to some people, or some person might not get it. She's not utilitarian at all, especially because there's not a top. There's literally not a top. Oh, sorry. So, and that's like a very prized object for me. I don't know if this video is gonna be usable at all. I might just post it anyway. But I feel like my relationship to what makes life worth living, and the fact that a lot of it is art and beauty and like texture and fashion, these aren't things that I feel like are valued outside of the people who are sort of like fanatics, obsessed. So I don't really know how to end this video. I don't really know what to say beyond, I hope this was an interesting meditation for you on how you relate to objects. I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear how you relate to objects. Do you collect things? Are there things that you have a hard time having too much of? Are you a hoarder? Are you a minimalist? If you're in between, what does that mean for you? I'm just so curious. I want to have more conversations about objects and what makes life worth living and the relationship between the two. I'm very curious. I think it also has to do with the fact that I moved a lot as a kid, and not having money and all these kinds of things as a kid. Like I didn't have really an opportunity to really like make a world of my own in an unlimited way, or I don't know. So as an adult, I've continued that. I've lived in multiple countries, many states, and this is my first time having like a large house with a lot of space for stuff and storage for that stuff, and that kind of like very American way of experiencing objects. And so that's my current experience, and why my thoughts on this are starting to evolve is because I'm like, well, I have the opportunity, and what do I do with that? Because there's something in between. Like I don't want a completely bare space, but I also don't want stuff just for the sake of stuff. There's a really deep connection between objects and mortality for me. And I think that's probably true for most people, because there's just an inherent relationship, right? Like once you die, your objects have to be distributed or dispersed. So that is what that is. And while you're alive, you have to figure out what to do with your objects constantly. It's just managing objects all the time, which is obviously in the background. Like most of the time we're managing our relationships and whatever, but we do that through objects at this point. We do that through a telephone. We do that through a computer. We do that through all of these different devices. So yeah, even connecting or relating to people is done through objects. Wow. Crazy. I never know what's actually going to come out when I put the camera on versus what I expect to say. And I don't know if I like that or not. I could obviously write a script, but I never have liked that kind of way of moving. But I'll try it in the future, I'm sure. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.